Surprising though it may seem, the referendum isn't the only political campaign in town. You might be forgiven for overlooking the battle for City Hall, which reaches its climax in 2 weeks' time. After all, both contests often feature the same cast. When London's multitasking mayor took to the stage in Manchester almost a week ago, it was a clear signal. Boris Johnson is the star turn in the campaign to persuade voters to leave the EU.
Watch out, here we go.
But he's also involved in a campaign closer to home. The mayor can often be seen alongside the Tory hoping to replace him at City Hall. In London, the EU referendum and election for mayor have collided. And when it comes to Europe, the two mayoral frontrunners are on opposite sides.
Any candidate who thinks London's future lies outside of the European Union doesn't understand our city, doesn't understand the social benefits, the cultural benefits, the benefits to our security or the benefits to our economy.
I believe the biggest risk for London is not coming out of Europe or staying in Europe. The biggest risk to London is if London embraces what I think is an anti-business, hostile, aggressive and backward-looking agenda.
This is the fifth time Londoners have been asked to choose a mayor, but there's little evidence the campaign has captured the imagination of voters. None of the candidates is a household name, for now anyway. So is the election being overshadowed by the referendum?
I have to say the EU referendum is not proving that much of a distraction. I think most Londoners are pretty decided that they want to stay in the EU.
When you talk about the EU, you're talking about getting control of our borders, and that's vitally important as well for London when it comes to housing, when it comes to the infrastructure, when it comes to overcrowding.
Certainly my party, if you're pro-European, would you vote for someone who doesn't support being in the EU? And I think that's going through lots of people's minds at the moment, but it's not coming up as an issue on the doorstep.
Whatever the outcome 2 weeks today, both sides in the Euro debate will be looking to see if Londoners choose a pro or anti-EU mayor. And just a reminder, there are 12 candidates standing in the election for Mayor of London. Polling takes place 2 weeks today from 7 a.m. until 10 p.m. But let's get back to the question of the day, Europe. To debate whether we should be in or out, I'm joined on the Remain side by the Streatham Labour MP Chuka Umunna and former Lib Dem London MEP Baroness Sarah Ludford, and on the Leave side by the current UKIP London MEP Gerard Batten. Welcome all three of you. Chuka, first of all, to you, how much did your role as the Shadow Business Secretary inform your views and thoughts on whether we should stay?
Massively. I've just visited this week a business in my constituency, Sass & Bell, who provide gift and homeware. I walked around their warehouse today, and where were the boxes going? Italy, Portugal, Austria, Belgium. These are their principal export market, and Richard Stone, the managing director of that business, was very clear to me, and he was very clear to his employees in the Q&A we did after about the European Union, that for their business, being part of this big global single market is a massive plus point for them.
Gerard, that shop, that business is one of your constituents. What do you say to him?
I'm very, very pleased that they're trading with Europe, and I hope they're trading with the rest of the world. Only 5% of companies in this country are actually concerned with international trade, but 95% of companies have to obey EU regulations. When we leave the European Union, trade will continue as normal because it's governed by World Trade Organization rules and not the European Union. The top 10 biggest exporters to the EU are obviously not members of the EU, and 6 of them haven't even got trade agreements, but they still trade very nicely.
Well, it would be nice if the Leavers could agree on what kind of model they want of relationship with the EU. I mean, at the moment, not only are they proposing to launch the ship off a cliff, but they don't even know. The captains are quarrelling about what the destination is. Do we want to be like Norway, like Canada, like Albania, which is Michael Gove's idea? I mean, this is absurd. It's in the interest of London businesses to stay in the EU single market, and which means that it actually cuts the amount of bureaucracy and red tape, because you don't have all the customs hassle to deal with, and you get one set of regulations. If you meet those, and then you can trade throughout with 500 million consumers. So you actually cut the amount of red tape by having the EU single market, and that is absolutely key. Do they want that, or not?
Do you want the Albanian model?
Well, we want the British model, and if you want to know what life outside the European Union looks like, then look at all the other countries, about 170 odd in the world, that are not members of the EU. Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Japan, India. They all are democratic. They all make their own laws. They all trade.
European Union, okay?
The point is, by being part of this single market, is our nearest and biggest market, 500 million customers. We have a special relationship with them. We don't have all these tariff barriers. We have a single set of rules that apply across that zone, which makes it far much more easier for our businesses, like Sass & Bell that I just talked about, to trade. Now, the point is, I'm not saying, Gerard, that look, we're not going to be able to trade at all with any of these other countries if we're not in the European Union. Nobody is actually, so it's not a relief at all, because it's a complete straw man that's built. But the point is what are the terms of trade? Now, say when we're negotiating with China, and that's in the process at the moment, we're sitting on one side of the table with 500 million people trying to negotiate an agreement with them, or say the US, which is happening at the moment, and they're sitting across the other side of the table with many more people, 300 million, etc. in the US. We're in a much stronger position sitting there with other people negotiating. And the problem that the Leave campaign have got, and this is what I'd say to your viewers, is they simply cannot spell out to you what out looks like. So you've had Michael Gove talking about Albania, you've had Boris talking about Canada, you've had Gerard just now talking about a swathe of different countries. What people need, certainly what business needs, and this is what the managing director of Sass & Bell said to me, they need certainty. They need to know what they're going to deal with. And at the moment, it's a giant leap into the dark. At least with our membership at present, we know
Sarah,
what you're getting.
Can I ask you, from your time as an insider in Brussels, you saw it all, warts and all.
Yeah.
There must have been parts of it that you didn't like.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, for my sins, not only was I a member of the European Parliament for 15 years, so I worked for the European Commission for 7 years. So one-third of my life
give us some horror stories.
You know, there are some people who are probably a bit old-fashioned in their views, a bit sort of, there was a little bit of an inclination sometimes for the old school, for kind of uniformity. And actually, I think it was very significant, the President of the Commission, Mr Juncker, yesterday said, OK, we fess up. We acknowledge that actually some EU regulations have been a little bit micromanagement in the past. And that is the result of British influence, I believe. I think we're extremely influential in reforming the EU.
Can I just ask Gerard, you've just heard what Sarah said about
we gold plate as well.
Do you see any merits in Europe?
You see, Mr Juncker yesterday, what he's doing is playing to the gallery in Britain. He's trying to say, we've got some of it wrong.
Come on,
we've got some of it wrong.
You're an MEP, you're happy to take the salary.
There's
nothing that you can do in the European Union that you couldn't do by intergovernmental agreements outside. And what we want, and we were talking about tariffs earlier on, the World Trade Organization have now negotiated tariffs down to about an average of about 2%. On trade anyway, so we don't have to worry about trade barriers coming up.
It's not just about tariffs on goods, it's about services access, and which is so important to London. 80% of the British economy. And what matters then is the ability to base yourself in London, whether you're a bank or another kind of business, and trade throughout the EU without having to get licensed in all those different markets. That is a key thing.
We are remain a member of the single market if we leave.
Well, what about all the other countries in the world?
It
doesn't make
You don't.
No, it doesn't
remain
not necessary.
It's
not necessary to trade with the European Union.
China
is not a member of the single market.
And China
cannot to be a member of the single market.
If that's the price for staying in the EU, then no, because we can be a country outside of the European Union.
Chinese banks cannot sit in Beijing and supply services to customers in the EU. They would have to open a subsidiary in London in order to do so.
As business secretary, as shadow business secretary, you obviously were tapped into the business community in London, but you know that there is no one view from business in London. I mean, the London Chamber of Commerce is neutral. London First, another business organisation, is voting for Remain, but there isn't a uniform view, despite what that businessman you spoke to today.
The idea that British business, London or in any other part of this country, is split down the middle on this issue is complete and utter nonsense that is being peddled by those who want us to leave, who want to muddy the waters. Business survey after business survey, from the British Chambers of Commerce to the CBI to the ADS, you list them, they are all overwhelmingly, you talked about London First, all overwhelmingly in favour of us staying in. I have to say, I dealt a lot with the London Chambers of Commerce. They may not have a corporate formal view, but everybody I spoke to there all of the members I spoke to at the London Chambers of Commerce were very strong about the fact that us being a European capital city for businesses in London, and when I say European, I mean part of the European Union, is absolutely crucial.
And I think
crucial.
Are you two both cheerleaders for Project Fear?
That's ridiculous.
What fear are we talking? We just talked about risks and uncertainty.
I think what we're saying is that it's risky. You know, the leap into the unknown. Gerard refuses to answer what kind of alternative model.
He doesn't want to be in a single market.
He doesn't want the single market. So is it Canada or is it Albania?
The fantasy. This is the fantasy. The idea that somehow Britain, which is the fifth largest economy in the world, cannot not remain a world trading nation, and we can't do what all the other countries of the world do, who are not in the EU but that continue to trade with the EU.
At the moment, we have certainty. We know where we are. We know the EU needs improvement and reform, but you cannot say what would happen the day after Brexit.
And that is destabilising. The one thing that we all have to fear.
Enemy of investment.
But you see, this is the only message that the Remainers have got. It's as Boris Johnson said recently, they are the Gerald Ratners of politics. We know it's crap, but you have to buy it anyway. That's the only argument that they've got. Oh, it's all bad. We need to reform it. No, not all bad. We need to reform it.
I don't think it has to bring in bad language.
You know when somebody's losing the argument, when they have to resort to abuse, and basically the argument. This is
Boris Johnson.
But we always end up in this Project Fear place, or Gerald Ratner, and all this thing when people have lost the argument, and what they build up is this big conspiracy theory. So you know, the so-called the biggest unions in the country, Unite in Unison, led by Len McCluskey and Dave Prentice, we're asked to believe that they are in cahoots with those socialists at the CBI and the IMF, and also with the governor of the Bank of England. All of it, of course, being orchestrated by President Obama. All of these independent organisations, by the way, at the behest of George Osborne, to tell you that we should leave, that we shouldn't leave. It's a fantasy.
There's not a single independent economic report they can point to rely on. Better alternative outside. There's no friend or ally or partner in the world. There's no member of the Commonwealth.
Marine Le Pen.
Marine Le Pen. Yeah. Well, she's not exactly a friend.
Yeah.
You know, we'd rather not actually have her endorsement. But you know, this idea that the Commonwealth is desperate for us to leave the EU. Can you name one Commonwealth country whose leader is calling on us to leave?
I'm not interested.
You cited Australia and New Zealand. They have urged us to stay in.
My reason for wanting to leave the EU is very fundamental, and it's the same one that was voiced in 1975, 41 years ago, when I voted to leave in the referendum then. And I've got a pamphlet somewhere at home written by Tony Benn, and it explains clearly this is a matter of democratic control. We can either be a democratic country outside of the European Union or an undemocratic country inside the European Union, and we should not allow other countries to tell us how to vote.
This issue of control is a nonsense. I am a Member of Parliament. In the last Parliament, we passed 121 Acts of Parliament. Just 4 of those were implemented exclusively to implement European legislation. The idea that we do not have control over our own affairs is nonsense. And when we do actually choose to pool sovereignty and make decisions jointly with our EU partners, we are on the majority side when there are votes on the European Council 9 out of 10 times. So why talk down our influence?
Sarah, Gerard, we've run out of time, I'm afraid. Thank you very much for coming in tonight. I'm afraid that's all we have time for tonight. Thanks to my guests, Theresa, Chuka, Sarah and Gerard. Thank you too for watching. I'll be back in 4 weeks' time when we'll be picking over the results of the London mayoral and Assembly elections and asking what they mean for the capital. Until then, good night.